This month, October, is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Many things are happening in New York City and really throughout the country in regards to bringing awareness to the issues and just really, bringing to the surface some conversations that people don't get to have throughout the year. I always say domestic violence is an everyday conversation, but in October, we really get an opportunity to highlight it even further and even more. I want to start just by saying that, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, these are words that we hear a lot. What we hear and understand is that, it really is about how people experience different types and forms of abuse. And sometimes we may assume that it only happens in certain communities or to certain people. But the reality is that intimate partner violence or domestic violence is very, very much something that many, many people are struggling with. There is no one community, there is no one race, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status, and all relationships. It could be cisgender relationships, anyone from the LGBTQ community experience these relationships. It is really something that is, unfortunately, and I really don't take pride in saying this, very common. I'm putting first and foremost is how complicated intimate partner violence can be. There's so many, not only feelings and emotions, but so many things that someone who is experiencing abuse has to navigate, right? And it's not just a person going through this and it just stays within that person and the person who's doing the abuse, but it can impact the family, neighbors, the community. So, it's a lot more than just two people experiencing this. And in reality, it is one person who is being abusive and the other person navigating it, dealing with it, negotiating their safety. It can look like a lot when you see all of these different words, and that is because it is a lot. Folks who are going through this have to really deal with so much. And it is not dealing with family or children. It may also be dealing with immigration. It may be dealing with police. It may be dealing with extended family, faith communities. And so we really recognize that, survivors, as we choose to call them, are going through many and multiple obstacles. And just for a definition, just to put a real clear definition to it, it is something that we kind of take the umbrella word like domestic violence. Domestic violence could mean family. It could mean, grandparents being involved, aunts and uncles, cousins, children, grandchildren. But if we want to shrink it a little bit and just for the purposes of training, look at the intimate partner, it is something that can occur with someone who you have more than a friendship with. It can be someone you're dating, someone you're living with, someone who you are just seeing or talking to in a more intimate way. It does not need to only be someone who you're married to or have children with. Definitely it can be, but it doesn't have to. And what we know is that it is something that could have happened already, the actual stuff, or the threat of it. And I want to emphasize the threat piece because some people say, well, they're just saying that they're going to do something. They're not really going to do it. Threats are real and should be taken seriously because in the context of intimate partner violence, threats most of the time are followed through in different ways. And we have to understand that there's more than one way of someone being abused or an abuser, or they're different words. The person that causes harm is another word that chooses to be abusive. So you see, it could be physical. And I think most of us understand that. We see, things in movies, we see things on TV, we see images that really clearly show that physical abuse is abuse. However, there's so many other ways and forms and tactics that the abusive partner or the person that causes harm can utilize and use. And that would be sexual, It can be psychological, which can include verbal and emotional and spiritual abuse, and economic abuse. Really getting someone in the pocket or really, really taking someone's finances can be very impactful. And what it does is it kind of changes the game for the survivor. You are no longer, if you're going through all of these things on a regular basis, you're no longer living as a person who doesn't have to worry about their safety. You are now worried about your safety, right? And because of that, you are not functioning in the way that you used to function. And you're very much afraid of what could happen to you, if you have children, to your children, if you have extended family around, just overall afraid. And fear is something that we also tend to minimize in society, individual fear. And so many times that's not taken seriously, but the fear is real and very paralyzing. And what I want to emphasize even more on this page is the last definition, last line to the definition, which is, it is a pattern. And it's important to think about it in a pattern. And the goal of the person who is being abusive or doing the abuse is to establish and maintain power and control by any means necessary, right? Any means necessary. So we're looking at many and multiple ways in which someone wants to have power and control. Okay. And I say that because sometimes you hear or you see things and they may not appear in a way that is stereotypical or in a way that we're told is abusive. Sometimes I hear people say, well, that person seems so calm or so nice. That was such a nice neighbor or person in the community. I can't really believe that that person is abusive. And really, it's not about how they always express themselves in public, because in public, most people generally don't show their inner self or what they do in private. But you can be a good person in public and also commit these acts with your partner or your ex-partner. And that's something that people struggle with. People kind of say, well, it doesn't seem right. How can this person do that? And, I think we have to kind of bust some of those myths. We have to challenge that it is not just the exterior. It's really what that person is doing in their intimate relationship or in their ex relationship. The different types and forms of abuse, as I mentioned, can really overlap. It's not that we say an experience of abuse is only one thing. It could be a variety of these types and forms, right? And because of that, it can look like so many different things for so many different people. We have to take into consideration that individuals have individual personalities. We also have a cultural context. We also have different ways in which we reflect pain, suffering, and anger. So there are different ways in which this can happen. The main thing is that you have to think about it being about power and control, right? It is not just about anger. It is not just about, one type of way that someone can be abusive. So verbal tactics can be just using actual words, but also body language, right? It's not just sentences that come out of your mouth or one word. It could be how you use your body to intimidate, right? And sometimes abusers are able to do other things besides yelling and screaming and cursing. They can have a look on their face that could be very scary or menacing, and it's basically a message telling the other person, the survivor, I mean business, or wait till we get home, or you've upset me, And it's kind of like maybe when some of us were children and our parents gave us that look, that is something that an abuser can use. And I always tell somebody that should be a warning sign, like this relationship is not a parent-child relationship, right? And if someone is using their body and other things to scare and intimidate you, there is a clear indication that it's about power and control and not about hope and love and respect and all the things that we kind of tend to agree is healthy, right? Getting into a survivor's face, name calling, using code words, anything to harm and intimidate, right? And I know for a fact that for some survivors, these things can happen in public and other people wouldn't even realize it or pick it up. And so a lot of times they're feeling hopeless and helpless, like, what's going on here? No one's going to believe me. The emotional and psychological tactics are very similar, using intimidation, manipulation, and harassment. And one of the top tactics, and I always say this even when I'm in person, someone who's trying to isolate you, someone who is trying to keep you away from your family, your friends, in a variety of ways, they do it in different ways, is really exercising power and control, right? And the isolation can be, preventing you from going out or spending time, but also it could be creating rifts or drama in the family or cutting you off completely, like relocating you. Let's say you've lived in another country and now they've moved you here for the purposes of isolating you. And that can be a little confusing because many times the conversation is, oh, let's move to New York, it'll be better for us, I'm doing this because I love you. And in fact, the real core reason is not because of love, it is because of wanting to have power and control. And that can be a painful reality for many survivors. That could also be very confusing. And on the outside, it may also look a little bit like, oh, well, they're not doing this because of isolation. They're doing this because they love the person. And so we have to kind of, think about this further and ask more questions. The mind games or gaslighting, really having someone question their reality is part of what gaslighting is. Let me give you an example. Let's say I put my, earrings on the nightstand and I wake up in the morning and they're not there. And I ask my partner, where are my earrings? And my partner will suggest that maybe I'm kind of losing it or forgetting things, and will say things like, well, I didn't see anything on the nightstand, you probably don't even have earrings like that. I actually don't remember you even having earrings like that. Are you sure you have earrings like that? So a lot of it is about making you kind of second guess yourself, doubt yourself, and also feel like, am I losing it? So the mind games are real, putting you down, shaming you, humiliating you. And another thing that we maybe need to kind of put a star to is being jealous and overprotective. Jealousy is an emotion and a feeling, but when it becomes an action of power and control, that's when you know that, maybe something is not okay here, right? And when someone says you're not allowed, or I'm forbid you, or you can't do certain things, then that is something that should be a red flag, a warning sign. All of these things are warning signs, right? Threatening to harm you, the children, your family, if you don't do as they say. And last but not least, especially now in the political times that we're living in, issues of saying, I'm going to call immigration, I'm going to make sure that you're deported, are also very much part of power and control. Sexual tactics, a lot of what we see now, especially post, the decision in the Supreme Court about abortion, has really brought sexual tactics and reproductive coercion to the forefront of our conversations, right? So you're using not only sexual coercion and aggression when it comes to sex, but also reproductive coercion. What are abusers doing to force, reproduction, force pregnancies, and things like that? So we have rape, sexual assault, any type of guilt tripping or making someone feel that if they don't do something sexually, that they are less than, so shaming them or making them feel like if you don't do this sexually, I'm going to go somewhere else, right? So there's this pressure, there's this push. That's what the coercion means, right? And then the reproductive coercion could fall under the birth control sabotage, forcing you to have sex without condoms, any sort of pressure to have pregnancy. And it's a scary time in our country right now, where there are certain states where an abuser can really do this and it not be seen as problematic. It may be that the survivor may get in trouble and not the abuser. So that's a whole nother workshop that we can do about Roe versus Wade and the impact on domestic violence. But there's a big, especially if you're a survivor who is in an abusive relationship or marriage and you already have children and now your husband has raped you, and you want to seek assistance for your reproductive health, and you can also be arrested for that. So that's a big issue. Forced to have an abortion if you don't want to, that's the flip side. And to have sex with other, that can also be something that we see a lot, where it's recorded and used as blackmail. And then last but not least, using cheating and infidelity as a power piece, so to speak. If I'm cheating because you haven't done these things for me, or I'm going to cheat because you haven't done these things for me. And it's an emotional and psychological blow, but also a physical and sexual blow. Like, what if you experience negative consequences because of your health being impacted by the cheating? So we have to think about all of these things. Forced sex with objects or animals. We have a coalition with the ASPCA because this is so common. And also, the topic or the category of sexual abuse is so hard for people to talk about. There's extra shame and blame that if animals were used only in a real trusted relationship of someone you trust and will possibly that information come out. Engage in pornography, forcing you to be videotaped, or you may not even know you're being videotaped, forcing you to watch something that you don't want to. Prostitution, stripping, sex trafficking, big link with sex trafficking and domestic violence, and controlling all aspects of their sexuality or their sex life in a relationship. One of the things that I'm working on a lot at Connect is working with midwives and doulas and looking at how domestic violence can also be a big issue with pregnancy. Pregnancy is a time where domestic violence escalates. So if you look at any research and data and statistic, pregnancy is a very, very scary and dangerous time. And abusers will do all forms of abuse, but they also can control all aspects of the pregnancy, who's going to be there during the labor and delivery process, how they're going to deliver. So it can be very, very complicated. And then the issues of putting things online. Once something goes viral, it's there. But blackmail can be very real. Financial and economic tactics, money, economics, using sabotage, control, and coercion. I always tell people, being hit in the pocket is also very traumatic, just as much as being physically hit. So stealing from the survivor, pressuring survivor for money, any employment sabotage, you can't work, or I'm going to go to your job and make a scene so you get fired. or something happens to you. Identity theft, always looking at your credit report. You can get a free credit report annually. Because an abuser knows all of your information, for the most part, many of them do, identity theft can be very easy. Opening up credit cards online, having everything be emailed them to a personal email that they've set up in your name. So, damaging credit is real. Preventing access to bank accounts, credit cards, insurance, preventing the person to be on the lease of the apartment or mortgage of a house or co-op. And then these last 2 points, I think people don't think about as much, but it does impact your financial freedom and your financial stability if you can, let's say, have a job where you need a driver's license, or you being prevented from learning the language on purpose in order for you not to be able to get a job or be employed. And that happens quite frequently, messing up or being the obstacle for you having financial freedom and financial stability. Last but not least on this chart is physical tactics. We all kind of see that. We all kind of know what that looks like. There used to be a campaign in the city, I would say about maybe 8 or 10 years ago, and it was a woman's face, and there was bruising on the face and bleeding down the nose, and in the nose were data and statistics about domestic violence. And that is one aspect of it. And I used to look at that picture all the time because it was on my subway station, and many bus stops had it. And I would think, if you are experiencing abuse and you don't look like that, and you don't have physical scars, or you've never been touched physically or harmed, you may feel like what's happening is not abuse and that you may not be in an abusive relationship. So I found that campaign to be problematic, but it did, kind of highlight some of the data of how physical abuse occurs. And it's not just being hit or harmed, but it could also be controlling your physical appearance. And that's something that maybe folks don't think about, right? That it controls your physical appearance. So it could be about forcing someone to gain weight or lose weight, changing their diet, making them be a vegetarian or making them be a meat eater, or, some sort of specific diet. With the physical appearance, you're looking at everything from, clothing, makeup, hair color, hairstyle, jewelry, anything about your appearance. And in the past few years, we've seen an increase in abusers forcing plastic surgery as well, especially since it's become more feasible in terms of economics, going to like Dominican Republic or Colombia, or places where they can receive, everything from breast implants to tummy tucks to butt implants for relatively cheaper than it would be here in the United States. Any kind of forced tattoos or branding, not only to embarrass that person, but also to let the message know that they belong to the abuser. So, that's also kind of something that people don't think about, right? Maybe that tattoo was not decided as something that that person really wanted. Keeping someone in the house, right? Like holding them hostage, literally. I had a client who was held hostage, and the abuser had these very big, aggressive dogs, and the abuser would let the dogs loose in the house when they left. And basically, the survivor was trapped kind of in the bedroom, because if she walked out of the bedroom, the dogs were trained to attack or be aggressive. So, these are things that we don't really think about. Sabotaging access to healthcare or medical needs. You need to go to the doctor for whatever, an ailment, or you're sick, or you have a chronic illness, or during COVID, we saw abusers preventing survivors from getting any medical attention and or vaccination. driving erratically, exposing the survivor to any STDs, and then, just in general, physical harm. And we know what that looks like. Sometimes it's so painful and so scary to think that survivors are being forced and coerced to do these things, and knowing that if the abusive partner isn't held accountable, and whatever the accountability would look like in that piece, then there's always this risk of the survivor feeling like, I'm going to, be embarrassed or shamed by the world if this video comes out, or something like this is shared. It's important conversation, because whether you've experienced it or not, someone, more than likely, someone has experienced this or is experiencing it, right? And we want to reach out, and we want to be anchors for people. We want to share resources. Sometimes we just don't know where to start, where to get help, who to talk to, Sometimes people just are so overwhelmed that you don't know where to get help or how to get help. The reality is that we are still dealing with communities that are deserts in terms of resources, communities that funding is not put in for resources, communities that people who don't get resources because they are undocumented. So there's a variety of reasons. And, not to say that it's okay, but this is what the reality of what we have to deal with. But the advocacy is there, the support is there. Sometimes we just need the information of where to go to get help. One step is just reaching out for support and help. Sometimes, that makes such a difference. Survivor is linked with a very supportive advocate, and they find hope and they find refuge and can develop a safety plan with that advocate. And, the road is long, and the road of healing, the journey of healing is long too. And the reality is, issues with court hearings and appointments and things can be very tough, and can, really make things seem and feel worse, right? But the long haul is where you see survivors feeling safe, their children feeling safe, and when justice really occurs, that as well.